Confidence is born from demonstrated ability, and the Denver Broncos win on Sunday against the Eagles could change the course of their entire season. We'll break it all down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode. Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We know it's your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen. However you choose to do just that. We got a lot to break down on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by our friends over there at Mazda. And like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. And here's what you're going to get on today's bonus episode of the show, fresh off the heels of a monumental victory for this team on Sunday against the defending Super Bowl champions, Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to go through why this win on Sunday against the Eagles could change the course of the Broncos' entire 2025 season if they can capitalize on that. Plus, we'll also go through an injury update here to Ben Powers, who suffered a biceps injury in the Broncos' win on Sunday. Will he miss time? What's the latest on that? Plus, Jarrett Stidham isn't making the trip either, but for a good reason. You get all that on today's episode of the show. So let's dive into this as well. I mean, Broncos Country, you're still probably excited, jazzed, looking at highlights, going through and rewatching the game. I'm going through the All-22, and it's been fun to watch the grit, the fight that this Broncos team showed in Sunday's game against the Eagles. Because as I mentioned, I wasn't very confident when it was 17-3 going into the fourth quarter, and the Broncos just simply didn't have momentum until Bo Nix really started to get things going in that fourth quarter. They impressed me. They showed us something that we have not seen from this team so far, I think, in the Sean Payton era, right? Like, I think that we can look at this Payton team going back to 2023. They clawed their way out of a 1-5 start. But now this is an entirely different team, right? That required a lot of true grit, resilience. This Broncos team has that, and they showcased that last year. But for them to be down 17-3, to claw, pun intended, their way back against the Eagles, the way that they did, to find a way to stop the Eagles' offense defensively after you gave up a couple of explosive plays, this was a statement win. It was monumental. And it goes to one thing that I wanted to talk about here. Sayre and I talked about it in our post-game podcast. This is the biggest win for this Broncos team in the last 10 years, right? Since Super Bowl 50, I think the stakes of this, right? And yes, it's an NFC game. At the end of the year, there's no tiebreaker between the Broncos and the Eagles. But I think when we look at this game and how it's played, you can't undersell it enough, like how important a win like this was for a team like the Broncos, right? Who the narrative for them coming into this game against the Eagles is, well, they can't beat the good teams. They can't beat teams with winning records. And that was the narrative on the Bo Nix and Sean Payton pairing so far. Yes, they beat Kansas City last year without their starters. Everyone keeps reminding them they did it. They beat Kansas City without the starters. I think a lot of people forget that this Broncos team showed a lot of resilience and grit on the road last year at Arrowhead. Should have beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but we can't go back and cry over spilled milk here. I'm saying that this is a good Broncos football team. This is a tough team. And look, I think it's easy. Like when they're down 17-3, yeah, it doesn't look pretty, but for them, they showed us that they could claw their way out of a situation like this. And I think that this could have massive ramifications on this Broncos team throughout the entire season. And here's why. Sean Payton talks about it all the time. Confidence is born from demonstrated ability, right? You gain more confidence the more you start to do things. And the more that you do things, right, the more belief you kind of encapsulate here. And I think that when you look at the Broncos sideline, and you look at like after Bo Nix and the offense scored that touchdown, and they got up 18-17, Pat Surtain's running off the field, and he's looking at Bo and he's saying, yeah, like you can tell that there's this belief internally amongst the players. And right there, to go on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles defense that, granted, they have some new pieces, but they're pretty intact from last year's team that dominated and derailed the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl in just epic blowout fashion, right? For the Broncos to go on the road against an undefeated team like that and to claw their way back and to win a game of that magnitude, I think speaks volumes to the level of resiliency that this team really does have. And the thing is I think we can all sit here and agree that this Broncos team hasn't quite fully pieced everything together just yet, right? And that could be a scary good thing here. I think some of the developments that we saw that we want to see when we talk about confidence being born from demonstrated ability, not only does that apply to beating good teams, but I think you can look at individual players and you can apply that same process. So let's take a look here at J.K. Dobbins. I think J.K. has done such a great job of breathing life here into this Broncos offense. And it's the little things. I was going back and rewatching the game, and there's times where the Eagles are just crashing their D-line inwards, and it doesn't look like there's a hole that's opening up. And then you just see J.K. stay patient for a second, and then he shoots through for a 13-yard run on one big play that moved the chains here for the Broncos, that helped get this drive kickstarted, that ultimately allowed J.K. to score from 2 yards out to make it 17-10 at that point. J.K. is like this little accelerator, the Energizer Bunny, I think, to this offense. But then not only that, it goes to Courtland Sutton, where you need a big play. Okay, we're going to find a way to go to Courtland. Courtland against Quinyon Mitchell, one of the NFL's top young cornerbacks in today's game. He was having a great game up until Courtland started getting going late in that third quarter. Really, I think in the final minute and a half of the third quarter, Courtland started to get, some rhythm and some wheels about him. And then the fourth quarter, we just saw Courtland go up there and make some big plays on some back shoulders, big body adjustments in the air, boxing out a smaller defender. And then that 3rd and 15 play where he caught, I think, a 34-yard catch right there. That was so big for this team, right? And so now you see that element taking place here. You see the confidence level growing in Bo Nix, who shook off a rough start where he had 79 yards at halftime and he couldn't really get the ball to anybody at that point. And then he goes and he catches fire, 14 of 18 in the second half, 9 of 10 passing in that fourth quarter alone. Bo was surgical and he was decisive and he did the things that the Broncos needed him to do. That is what you're talking about as, okay, we've been in these situations, and hopefully you're not in many, right? You don't want the Broncos to be in a situation where they're trailing 20-3 or 17-3, but now against good teams, if you find yourself in that hole, in that situation, this team has shown that they can claw their way out of that. And I think that they just have this locked in mentality where when things get tough, and that's one thing that Sean Payton said this offseason, it goes back to Courtland Sutton. He says, when things are falling apart, Courtland is the guy you look to, and he's going to keep things afloat for you. And that's exactly what we saw. But let's talk about Evan Engram now. We talk about that confidence. What we saw from him there, and Sean Payton said it in his coming out of his post-game presser, is that at halftime, he and Evan, they were mad at each other. And that, Evan was mad at him, and Sean challenged him back. And then in the second half, they said, okay, we're gonna get him some touches. And man, that kind of spin around catch that he made was incredible. What was impressive was on his touchdown catch, he goes through and he sits and finds a really, really, really tight spot there. Jalen Carter's underneath. Bo finds him. He runs through a Jalen Carter arm tackle where Jalen's trying to wrap up his legs. And we know how big Jalen Carter is. And he fights his way into the end zone. This is a confidence booster here for Evan Engram. So not only is it a confidence booster for the team as a whole, but these players that we've mentioned here specifically, they've gained confidence because of that. And a win like this, I don't want to downplay it, and I don't want to hype it up too much, but I think that from a psychological standpoint, when you overcome circumstances the way that Denver did in this game, and you piece together a very, very clean victory where you dominate really in that second half, that right there can tell you who you are as a team. Now the Broncos, they did it, and now they believe we are a team. Sean Payton asked them in the locker room after the game, who are you afraid of? And they said, nobody. We're not afraid of anybody. That right here is the message. That's the mentality that this team needs to carry throughout the course of the rest of the season. And I think it's big too, because this win, you have to build on it. You're in London now. The Broncos obviously are in London as we speak. They traveled after they beat the Eagles, and you can't have a letdown against the New York Jets on the road. I understand there's some dynamics there. The Darren Muji, maybe a revenge game dynamic there. Aaron Glenn against his former mentor, Sean Payton. Like, the storylines are already writing itself. But those storylines shouldn't matter this week. The Broncos need to go take care of business on the road overseas. And with that said, speaking of overseas, Broncos Country, a couple of players did not make the trip to London. One for a good reason, and one reason that has maybe some concerns for the Broncos offensive line if he has to miss some time. We'll break that down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Square. Your favorite neighborhood spots, they run on Square, and there are certain places that make the neighborhood the neighborhood. These are the places that become an extension of home, whether it's the sports bar that's dedicated to your team's fan base, the spot with the best wings in town for game day, or that beloved local chain that's been rooted in your community for years. These businesses are what bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And here in Denver, Shake Shack is one of those businesses that help the neighborhood thrive. You can find one everywhere, and there's nothing better than a juicy, delicious Shack burger after a Broncos win. Shake Shack is my spot to go to. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedon NFL to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. This episode is also brought to you by Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and they keep moving the game forward. Nick Bonito keeps moving the game forward with a dominant path of play so far, 5 weeks through the NFL season. Bonito, he has come up big, leading the NFL in sacks right now with 7 on the year. His 2.5 sack performance against the Philadelphia Eagles and the Broncos' big-time victory on Sunday is moving the game forward. So when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And we know FanDuel is the place to be with the NFL season here and ahead of week 6 of the NFL lineup. FanDuel has you covered with the latest odds here. With the Denver Broncos opening up as 7-point favorites against the New York Jets, FanDuel, they want to get you in on the action because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. So what are you waiting for? Get in on the action. Parlays, same game parlays, anytime touchdowns, you name it. FanDuel, they've got it. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. The Denver Broncos are in London, but they're without 2 players that are on their active roster who did not make the travel trip with them after they beat the Eagles on Sunday. Broncos Country, thank you once again for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. If you love the show already, make sure you do us a favor, hit that subscribe button or that follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. The Broncos already overseas in London, and they do not have Ben Powers or Jarrett Stidham. There's a good reason, and then there's a bad reason. So let's get to the good reason here first. Jarrett Stidham did not make the trip to London because he and his wife, Kennedy, they're expecting the birth of their 3rd child here, and it's expected any time at this point. So there is a chance here that Stidham could be back in time for Sunday's game. Obviously, as the backup quarterback to Bo Nix, there's a chance that he could catch a flight later out in the week. But if not, the Broncos will probably move up with Sam Ehlinger as their backup guy for this game. But I think this is an important thing to touch on here because Sean Payton really believes in guys not missing these big milestone moments, right? Sean is very much all about the memories, the things that matter, family being one of the more important pieces. And one thing he said in his post-game locker room speech after the Broncos beat the Eagles, he said, you won't always remember the money. You won't remember the cars. You won't remember some of these things, but wins like this is what you're going to remember. And also, I think in general for Sean, as we've seen with him, being there for life's biggest events like the birth of a child has been big. I think more recently, Jaleel McLaughlin and obviously his wife, they had their daughter, and Sean said, hey, that's more important. Be there. You don't need to go to this final preseason game. You're going to make the roster. We want you to be there. It's the same exact thing here for Jarrett Stidham in this situation. So obviously happy for Jarrett and his wife. Jarrett is just a great dude to, talk to inside the locker room. I know a lot of Broncos fans don't normally get that experience here. Jarrett's a laid-back, fun, competitive guy. He does a lot for this team behind the scenes. And so obviously I think for him, they hope that he can rejoin them at some point this week. But this is a week where for Sean Payton, I don't think he's too worried about that. I think the expectation is that Jarrett will rejoin the team in London at some point this week here. But being there for the birth of a child is probably more important. And it's a good thing that Sean Payton prioritizes that. So that is the good news. But let's get to the bad news here, Broncos country. Ben Powers, the Broncos starting left guard, played every single snap, over 70-plus snaps on offense, with a bicep injury that he suffered in that game. He did not make the trip to London, and the Broncos had to send out an injury report Sunday night because they're going overseas. And if they have to leave somebody behind, they have to document that. It's a league policy there. So a little surprising for us to hear that Ben Powers was making the trip back to Denver, not going to London here. He's going to Denver to undergo more testing. So we're going to continue to monitor this, but he suffered a biceps injury. He finished the entire game, which is obviously a good sign there. But the fact that he did not make the trip, I think, is something we have to keep an eye on here as the Broncos are preparing for the New York Jets this week in a London showcase. And so what does this mean if Ben Powers is not able to take kind of like the Jarrett Stidham route and maybe rejoin the team later on in the week by catching a flight? well, then that means that the Broncos are going to have to look at some other options here on the offensive line. And if Ben Powers' injury happens to be serious, which we don't know the severity of it just yet, but if that is the case, this is something that they're going to have to game plan for, which goes into veteran offensive lineman Matt Parrott, who got a lot of reps at guard in the NFL preseason and training camp. And for Sean Payton, one of the things he's talked about as well, even in the preseason and training camp, was some guys have a preference to a side, not necessarily a position, right? So for the left side, that's where Matt Parrott seems to be more comfortable, whereas Alex Palczewski, he can play guard. We saw him play plenty of guard in the preseason. He's also the extra tackle eligible here at this point. He's more of a right side guy, right? He's more comfortable on the right side. So I think that we probably will see, if Ben Powers is not able to go, if he's unable to play and misses time, I think Matt Parrott will step up into that spot. And there's also a chance to keep an eye on Alex Forsythe, the Broncos backup center behind Luke Wattenberg, could step in at the guard position as well here. But this would obviously be a big blow here for the Broncos offense. I think Ben Powers struggled in the preseason, but I'll say this, he's had a pretty good regular season here for the Broncos. And I love when they get him involved in the poll game. So if he misses some time here, this is a big loss for the Broncos offense. And obviously we talk about his contract that, he's kind of dwindling down out there. He's played every single snap so far of his contract, hasn't missed a game. That's what you love about Ben Powers, is the durability. So that could be in danger this week against the New York Jets. And we'll see if that is the case here. But the Broncos do have some contingency plans in place here. And with that, there could be some challenges too, right? You put somebody new into the offensive lineup, specifically, that could impact maybe your chemistry, or maybe some of the things that some guys can just play off of one another, on the offensive line or at other positions. You have all these reps together. You can sit there and you can read based off of, okay, we don't have to say anything, but I know how this guy blocks based on how he does that. We'll keep you updated all week long here, Broncos Country, on Ben Powers, Jarrett Stidham, anything else that's coming out of the Broncos realm, as they are now overseas in London. You got to factor in the time difference, so you'll get some updates probably in the middle of the night sometimes, as you're checking your phone periodically throughout the week. But we'll have you covered every step of the way, including a crossover Thursday with Locked On Jets later on this week. But Broncos Country, tomorrow's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we are going to sit down and we're going to talk about how the Broncos have a chance right now in the wide open AFC after week 4 of play. Undefeated teams falling left and right. There's no clear-cut perennial guy right now in the AFC, and the Broncos have a chance to become that. We'll talk about that and more on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.